Hello there, welcome. Welcome to this special Festive Tech Calendar 2023 video. So the Festive Tech Calendar runs every year all the way through December. There's a bunch of great content and great speakers every day all through December. And it's all for a good cause as well. So this year they're focusing on the Raspberry Pi Foundation. So there'll be links in the description of the video to go to the Festive Tech Calendar page and also to the Just Giving page to donate. So the Raspberry Pi Foundation is all about enabling children to problem solve and to learn technology all through code and computing. So a really great initiative there. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is Microsoft Fabric, and specifically the warehouse service. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into the Fabric front end, and we can get to it via Power BI. We can go to app.powerbi.com or through the Fabric URL, app.fabric.microsoft.com. And we've got a splash screen. We've got a page here that shows all of the different items that we can create in Fabric. Now, I'm pretty sure that there are other Festive Tech Calendar sessions that cover all of these different services within Fabric and getting started with Fabric itself. We're going to dive straight in to a workspace and start working with warehouses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the Experience persona switcher down the bottom left hand side and click Data Warehouse. Now I already have a workspace set up that is assigned to a Fabric capacity, so I'm just going to go to that workspace, my Festive Tech Calendar 2023 workspace. I already have a lakehouse created, and I'll explain why as we're creating tables and loading data in the warehouse. Now, to create a warehouse, all I do is just I click New, scroll down to Warehouse, and I'm going to give it the name Gold Warehouse. While that's creating the warehouse item, I am just going to flick very quickly to a diagram because I want to put the warehouse into context. Why are we creating it? Where does it sit in an architecture? So in Azure Diagrams, and again, all the links will be available, I've created a very basic diagram to show where the warehouse can sit. If anyone is familiar with what's called the medallion architecture, there's some great resources out there to learn about it, and what Microsoft are doing, Microsoft are aligning the way that you can architect Fabric with this lakehouse medallion architecture, which essentially consists of several zones. Now, the zones are commonly referred to as gold, silver, and bronze. They're not necessarily the physical implementations of the zones. A bronze zone could contain 2 or 3 physical implementations of data. But because we've got bronze, silver and gold, we've got 3 zones that I've used as an example here. And from left to right, we can start with the bronze zone, where the raw data is landed. That's the untransformed data. It may not be clean, it may have duplicates in. All those idiosyncrasies of the source systems are going to be present in that data. Commonly in Fabric, we're going to be using a lakehouse to store that data. It's going to be the same in the silver layer, in the cleansed layer, where it's at the same granularity of that raw data, but now we've cleaned it, we've deduped it, we've replaced missing values, we've checked data types. We've got it into a nice, clean, consistent set of data. And again, we're using the lakehouse to store that. It's when we come to this gold layer, this curated zone. This is where you've got the choice to use the warehouse. And again, this is what it's all about. It's all about choice. You don't have to use a warehouse. You can use a lakehouse. The warehouse brings the SQL engine and the rich tapestry of SQL functions and the skills that people have around SQL. That's what that warehouse is there for. It's definitely not a second-class citizen to the lakehouse. And I'm going to make sure that Microsoft stick to that. And what we have in the warehouse service is the ability to load data, and we curate it. We turn it into something that, well, is like a data warehouse. So whatever your chosen methodology, my preferred methodology is dimensional modeling, Kimball. The data warehouse service, this is where I'm going to model my star schemas. This is where I'm going to model my dimensions and model my fact tables. And I can do that all using SQL. And then that delivers downstream to Power BI and to reporting. So that's where it sits in terms of an architecture. Now I'm going to flick back to the warehouse service itself, and we should see that our warehouse has been built. What I'm going to do, I am going to use the web interface to create a table and insert into that table. But then we're going to look at the way that I like to do it. Right? So the first thing is we'll have a look at the queries. So I'm going to create a new SQL query, and I'm going to create a table. I'm going to create a table, DBO, I'll call it dim event, and I'll say event key int, event name, varchar 50, and that's it. That's all I'm going to do. So I'll run that, and if we just refresh the schemas on the left hand side, then we should see that the table is appearing. Let me just do a quick refresh of the web interface. And we can see the table. Now we can insert into that table. So I'll insert into dbo.dimEvent. And I won't bother naming the columns. I'll just say put in basket. Okay. So I'm just going to insert some data into that table. Run. Select all from dbo.dimEvent. And when I run that, we should see some data. All very simple so far. I can just create a warehouse, use the Fabric GUI to create a table and insert into. However, I'm going to drop the table. We're going to go into Azure Data Explorer, which is my preferred method of working with warehouses and tables. So let me drop the table. Dim event. Table's dropped, and I'm just going to close that SQL query. And you can see that the table's disappeared from the table list on the left hand side. So now if we switch to Azure Data Studio, a couple of things to note here. Firstly, the version of Azure Data Studio that you're using has to be minimum 1.46.1. And the database projects, which is an extension that you install. So if I have a look for database projects, they have to be minimum version 1.3.1 for the functionality that we'll go through. Now I've already created a database project. Very simple, just 3-dimension tables and a fact table. Most important thing in here is the supported platform. So I'm going to right click, go down to change the target platform, and we can see, well, all our usual suspects, the SQL Server versions from 2012 all the way up. Now we've got Synapse Data Warehouse in Microsoft Fabric. We've also got serverless SQL pools, technology that I particularly love. But we've got warehouses in Microsoft Fabric as a first-class citizen in database projects. So I'm going to click that, and we've changed to the target platform. And I'll just open up one of the scripts so you can see what we're doing. Nothing too different to a standard SQL Server warehouse. We're just creating tables. We've got a date table, we've got an event table, products, and we've got a fact table to hold some telemetry information. What I can do is I can build, and as an output, we'll get a very familiar result, which will be a DAC pack. Actually, if I have a look at the file system, there's a DAC pack. So anyone who's worked with Visual Studio, anyone who's worked with SSDT and database projects, it's the same thing here, except we're using Azure Data Studio. Now from here, I can actually deploy this to the Fabric warehouse. First thing I need to do is I'm just going to get the URL of the workspace, or the SQL endpoint of the workspace, which is basically like a server name. So up here, I've got a little gear icon, and I can get this SQL connection string. And this is the connection string to the workspace. So all of the warehouses and lakehouses, if they were in this workspace, you would connect using this SQL string and then specifying the database name. Because ultimately, when we're creating warehouses and lakehouses, they're like databases. They show up in SQL tools like databases. So from here, if I go back to Azure Data Studio, I'm going to publish. So I'm going to publish up the project, publish to an existing SQL server. I'll change the connection and I will specify that endpoint. I'm connecting with Universal with MFA support. If I drop down the database, and actually what I'll do is I'll just move my camera just in case it's hiding what's going on down the bottom right hand side. But look, Gold Warehouse as a database. So even though we've got the terms lakehouse and warehouse, we're dealing with databases. So let's select that Gold Warehouse. I'll connect. I'm just going to hit my advanced options and just say, do I want to, I don't want to drop objects not in source, because there's some additional DMVs, performance DMVs that have been added to the warehouse service, and I don't want those messing up my project. So I'll click OK, and if I click publish, then it's going to build the project. So we're going to get a DAC pack as an output. Then it's going to deploy into the Fabric warehouse. So we'll likely wait a few seconds for it to do this operation. And now we can see it succeeded. I'll just flip my camera back down to the bottom right. So if we go back into Fabric, go back into the web interface, let me just refresh the tables. And we should see those tables appearing in the list. So I fully recommend using Azure Data Studio with database projects to work with your warehouse service, because you can generate a project from an existing warehouse, and more importantly is you can source control it, well, with your Git provider of choice. So for example, I've used GitHub to source control this. It just makes development so much easier rather than just using the web interface. The web interface is great for getting started and testing things out, but I do like to have my schema source controlled. So there we go. So we've created the tables. Now we can start to populate them. But what I'll do first is flick back to Azure Data Studio. And I want to talk about constraints. So unique constraints, foreign key constraints. Even though we have the word constraint, even though we have the word unique, notice we've got the word not enforced, which is a requirement when you add constraints into Fabric Warehouse. Now, really what these constraints are is to help the engine. It's to help the optimizer. So if you specify that a column is unique, if there's any filtering, any joining, the engine knows when it's found a value, it's not going to find that value again in the table. Same with foreign keys. It's not enforced because actually you can insert duplicate data into a table even though the column has been specified as a unique key. All of your referential integrity has to be done in the data loading part. And this is the same for cloud data warehouses generally. Databricks has the same thing. And things like Synapse, dedicated SQL pools. You can create unique constraints and foreign key constraints, but they're not enforceable. So it's just a note there. However, it's very useful. What I'll do is I'll just flip back to Fabric very quickly. And I'm going to click on this model button down the bottom. And we should see that, there we go, our tables. I'm just going to hide these system tables. There we go. I'm just going to hide them when we build a report. Very useful, but out of the scope of what we're looking at today. But look, so there's our fact table and our 3 dimension tables. Not connected. I could create the relationships in this model view. Anyone familiar with Power BI will know how to create relationships here. However, I much prefer having the control over creating the relationships in the code in SQL. So I'm going to flick back to Azure Data Studio and let's connect to our gold warehouse again. So I'm just going to connect up to there. And we're going to alter the tables and add these unique constraints in. So if I just run that, took next to no time. And I'm going to add foreign keys from the fact table to those 3 dimension tables. So again, if I just run that, we get the statements ran very, very quickly. Brilliant. If I flick back to Fabric now, and we can see that the relationships have been created in the model view, but they're not activated yet. So I like to essentially script the foreign keys, the relationships in SQL for the warehouse. I can see those relationships in the model view and I can choose to activate them. So if we go in on each of the relationships and just activate them, I'm going to activate that relationship, and then lastly activate that relationship. So now we've got our schema. So we've got 3 dimension tables, we've got a fact table. Let's load some data into these tables. I'll show some different methods in how we can do that in the warehouse. So what we'll do is I'm going to go back to my Azure Data Studio and I've got a copy into. Now copy into, it was the de facto method of loading data into Synapse dedicated SQL pools. Very fast way of ingesting data, and it is one of the recommended approaches here as well, because it is essentially bulk loading data in. So I've got some dimension data for dates already there in a central location, and I'm just going to load it straight into the warehouse and select top 10. So what we'd better change the connection. And let me just go back to my warehouse and get the connection string. And we can just select that gold warehouse. And if I run that copy into command, that's going to bulk load that data from CSV into the table. There we go, 4,382, and we've got a table representation. So we can use the copy into. We can also just insert. Now, it's not really the recommended approach. I'm going to put it here because we've only got a handful of values that we're inserting. So that's one of the things to note about the warehouse service, is this isn't really a transactional system for lots of inserts, lots of singleton inserts and updates and deletes. It's really an analytical engine. But we can insert into the table. So again, I'll just do that here. And we can insert into the event table. So there we go. So we've got our 3 event lookups. And I'm going to populate the product table by using Dataflow Gen 2, which is a visual way, and anyone familiar with Power BI will recognize the interface here. So what I'll do is I'm going to go to my workspace, and I'm going to switch. Well, I've already switched to the data engineering, so I'm going to click new, and I'm going to find my Dataflow Gen 2. So wait for that to open. And as the source, I'm going to get data. I'm going to select the One Lake Data Hub. And I have some product data in a lakehouse that I'm going to use to load. A central repository for lots of data that I've reused elsewhere. We'll wait for that to connect to the lakehouse. And now I can select my product table. So I'll just select in products. And we should see the representation of the data coming up. There we go, 4 columns. That's what I expect. I create that connection. And here we go. We've got a familiar Power Query interface. With a twist though, because we can add a destination. One of those destinations is the warehouse service. But look, we've got SQL databases, lake houses, and data explorer pools as well. So I'll select the warehouse, and I'll select my gold warehouse, create a table called, use an existing table to load into. So let's just drill down and say dim product. No data in there at the moment. And I've got the option to either append to existing data in that table or replace. I'm going to choose to replace because it's my lookup data. So I'm going to save the settings there. And then finally, and I can just switch my camera, I'm going to publish. So down the bottom right hand side, I'm going to publish the data flow, and it's going to run that data flow to populate my warehouse table. I'll just flick my camera back there. So let's have a look at that warehouse. We'll have a look at the product table, and maybe we'll just select the query, and we'll just say select all, or top 10 all from dbo.dim product. Let that run. So it hasn't populated anything yet. I'm just going to check my other tables. Dot dim event. I can just run that, and we've got event data there as well. So let's check that product data. So nothing there yet. There we go. We've now got our product data. And that's now being powered by that data flow Gen 2 that I created. So I can set that up in a schedule. I can use a data pipeline to run that on a schedule as well. So if I go back to Data Studio, the last piece of the puzzle is the Lakehouse shortcut. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this into the Fabric web interface. I'm going to create a new SQL query. So now I'm going to switch, and we've got the Lakehouse there. So I'm just going to filter on the Lakehouse and say I've got this gold Lakehouse. Now, I've created a Lakehouse because what I want to do is I just want to shortcut to some data in another Lakehouse. I'm not going to load the data into this Lakehouse. I'm just merely going to use it to allow the warehouse service to query data in another Lakehouse, which is in another workspace. So at the moment, shortcuts are not supported from warehouses, but they are from lakehouses. So what I can do is here and create a new shortcut to an item in one lake. And I know where my data is. I'm going to pick this Lakehouse, and then from the available tables, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to pick this table here, which is all my telemetry data. Now, as I said, it doesn't copy any data. It merely creates a table reference to the data in the other Lakehouse. But I can query it as if it was a table local to this warehouse. But if I flick back to my warehouse, so I'm going to flick back to the warehouse here. Go to my queries. Down here, I can reference the local Lakehouse in the workspace that this warehouse is in using a three-part naming convention. But again, the table only exists as a pointer to the other Lakehouse in the other workspace. So I'm going to hit run, and we're going to see this data. It's probably about 1 billion rows of data. It's going to get loaded into this table. Okay, so now that the fact table has been loaded, we can click on it and get a little preview of the data within that table. But of course, the real power is when we switch to the model view. So I'm going to switch to the model view down here, and we've got our tables all set up, and I'll create a measure. So in this model, I'm just going to right click, I'll create a new measure. I'm just going to create a very simple measure, which is an event count, which is just going to be a count rows of our fact table. Now we've got some basic formatting that we can do here as well. So down, I'm just going to flick my camera to the bottom right hand side. I can click advanced, or I can say select it as a whole number. Okay, got a display folder if I want to have that in there. So let's just have that up. There we go. Whole number. Now that I've just created a basic measure, we can see that in the table itself. I'm going to click reporting, and we'll go to the table tools and build a report from that data that we've imported into that warehouse. So if I open up the report here, and in Fact Web Telemetry, I'm going to click my event count measure. So what I'll do is I'm going to switch that to a card. I'll also bring in the event count again. This time I'm going to switch it to the date. So I'm going to switch it to a line chart, Now, bearing in mind, we've just loaded the data in, so there's about 1 billion rows in that fact table. I'm going to drag date onto the x-axis. That's pretty quick. No caching involved at the point in time I did it, so this was a cold start. And this is because the data set is actually connected to the data in the new connectivity method called Direct Lake, which essentially the Power BI engine is able to go direct to the storage of the table itself, the Delta table, and load the data in to the Vertipack engine very, very quickly. So I'll do one last visual, which is another event count. And I'll go to the events themselves. I'll click on the event type. Now this is just some basic telemetry data about a shop with a website. And people can browse the website, they can look at products, put products in baskets, and eventually purchase them. And of course, what I can do is I can use the funnel visual here. So I'm just going to switch to the funnel here. So we can see the breakdown of those values from when someone's browsing a product all the way through to purchasing. So that, in a nutshell, is the warehouse service available within Fabric. It's really for your curated data, your gold layer, if you're using the medallion architecture terms. It's for delivery. So you're going to bring your data warehousing methodology, your chosen modeling pattern, and you can implement it in the warehouse. Thank you very much.